Hello and welcome to another Modern Horizons 3 set review. I'm paulcheon, and today we are going to be going over the green cards. Now, yesterday we went over the multicolored cards and the colorless cards, and this time I'm deciding to go in reverse order. I went with Wooburg in Outlaws of Thunder Junction, so now we're gonna go with I'm gonna start with green. I try to be clever there, but before I do start, I did want to say if you've enjoyed the content and wanted to support the channel in another way, I do have a Patreon. The link to the Patreon is in the description below, and I do want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you so much for your support, as it allows me to continue making all of this content. One additional note is that I did launch an extra tier in the Patreon, so take a look at the link to look at all the available options. The newest tier, the highest tier, will now give you access to a personal stream monthly, where me, along with all members of that tier, will get access to a personal stream where I can answer all your questions, and we can even come up with the topics that we want to talk about over the course of the stream. Now, I'm not going to be going over the explanations or mechanics this time around. The link to my grades for the green cards are in the description below, and if you click on that link, that'll also show you what my grading scale looks like and what the mechanics are. So I'm going to kind of skip that and head straight into the first card that we see here, which is the Annoyed Altasaur. 5 green for a reach trample dinosaur with Cascade. That is awesome. I mean, think Enlisted Worm, right? 5 green and a white, which has Cascade. And this one has reach and trample and is a single colored card. This card is awesome, and it just gives you a ton of value and is a really, really great payoff in green, particularly because green in this set is really looking to do a lot of ramping. So I think this is just an awesome card to play in your deck, and I'm going to give this a B. And it's going to be a high B, and I wouldn't be shocked if this ends up being an A- level card, but I think this is an excellent, excellent creature to play in your deck. Moving on, we have Basking Broodscale. 1 and a green for a 2/2 Eldrazi lizard, meaning it is devoid, meaning it has no color, so it does get benefits from things that point to colorless cards, but nevertheless, it is a green card because it costs green to cast. 1 and a green, adapt 1. Whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on Basking Broodscale, you may create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token with sacrifice this creature, add a colorless mana. Now, this is just a very solid card, something that you can play on turn 2, when you're trying to block, it's just hard to block. So let's say you play this turn 2 on the play, and then your opponent plays a 2-drop on the draw. When you attack on turn 3, they can't block. And if they don't, or if they do, then you can adapt and then make a Scion. So I think this is just a solid level green creature that you can play in your decks, and I'm going to give this a C. Moving on, we have Birthing Ritual. 1 and a green for an enchantment. Mythic. At the beginning of your end step, if you control a creature, look at the top 7 cards of your library. Then you may sacrifice a creature. If you do, you may put a creature card with mana value X or less from among those cards onto the battlefield, where X is 1 plus the sacrifice creature's mana value. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. This card is kind of like the new updated Birthing Ritual, Birthing Pod rather, but there's a few key differences. Number one is you can't look through your entire library, right? So you're not guaranteed to be able to put a thing into play. However, you also can't quote unquote whiff, in the sense that you get to look at the top 7 cards first if you have a creature, and then if you have a card that you can play off the Birthing Ritual. So let's say you have a 2-mana creature in play, you look at the top 7 cards, and if you can see a 3-drop or less among the top 7, then you can sacrifice your creature and put the bigger creature in play. The problem with this card, though, is it's card disadvantage, right? You play it, and you're basically trading your creature in the hopes that you get to trade it up for a bigger creature. And so because of that, I just feel like you need to have something really, really strong to be able to fetch for this card to actually be worth it. And then there's also just going to be instances where you play this and you whiff once or twice maybe, and in those instances, this is also just not going to be very good. So all in all, I just think Birthing Ritual is not something that I'm going to be interested in playing, and I'm going to give it a D. I think it can be interested in maybe in Constructed. It's a cool card to try out because you don't necessarily whiff all the time. But again, you're never up a card in this exchange, so I just don't want to play this. Next, we have Branching Evolution. 2 and a green for an enchantment. If one or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a creature you control, twice that many +1/+1 counters are put on that creature instead. So this is kind of a nice build around enchantment if you're looking to do the adapt thing. Additionally, this also really works well with, I believe there's the Selesnya common dog. It's like green and a white for a creature with vigilance that enters a battlefield with 3 +1/+1 counters. So let's say you play this and then you play the dog, it comes into play as a 6/6. So, I mean, this is clearly a build around, and it really just depends on how many ways you have to put +1/+1 counters on things. But I do think there's a lot of setup costs for this, and you need a lot of ways to put counters on things, right? Now, this works well with adapt, but at the same time, you're taking a turn off to play this, and then you need to play an adapt creature and then adapt, and then to be able to get some value out of this. So I just feel like this is probably an effect that's better in Constructed and not in Limited. And I'm not the biggest fan of Branching Evolution. I'm going to give this a D as well. If you have 7 cards that adds counters, then maybe you can bring this up to a C level card, but nothing that I'm super interested in unless there's a ton of adapt creatures in the format. Next, we have Collective Resistance. 1 and a green, instant, escalate green. Choose one or more, destroy target artifact, destroy target enchantment, target creature gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So this card's pretty interesting. For 2 mana, you get kind of a pseudo Snakeskin Veil protection type card. Hexproof and indestructible is a nice little combination. It's a really good way to protect some of your big green creatures, particularly because green is looking to ramp to big Eldrazi, right? So let's say you have a big Eldrazi and then you can play this to protect one of your big Annihilator creatures. That's pretty nice. Additionally, there's a lot of artifacts in this set, right? So that mode is also just not going to be irrelevant a lot of the time. So I think the flexibility of this card, where you have kind of an okay playable, maybe a D level combat trick on top of a disenchant, brings it up to a C level card for me. I can see instances where you can even get a 2-for-1, maybe even a 3-for-1 with this card, with the escalate cost on this card. So Collective Resistance, I'm going to give a C. Moving on, we have Let Your Memes Be Dreams, Colossal Dreadmask. 4 green for a living equipment artifact. Now remember, living equipment means when this equipment enters a battlefield, you create a 0/0 black Phyrexian Germ creature token, then you attach this equipment onto it. Equipped creature gets +6/+6 and has trample, and it has an equip cost of 3 green. So the joke is this is a 6 mana 6/6 trampler, right? That is a Colossal Dreadmaw. Now, Modern Magic has now evolved to the point where a 6 mana 6/6 with trample is just not a great card anymore. Just there's going to be a lot of good removal spells in the format, but this is a living weapon. Meaning, if they kill your creature, well, you can pay 5 mana, and if you move this to anything, any of your scions, well, all of a sudden you have a random equipment that can potentially take over the game, right? That can potentially take over the game. I mean, it is a pretty heavy cost to equip, right? 5 mana is a lot. And 6 mana for a 6/6, where if people are kind of also agreeing that shatter or disenchant type effects are good in this format, then maybe this card is just not going to be great. Just because if all of a sudden your opponent just, for example, like Collective Resistance, you get Collective Resistance, it just doesn't feel great, right? So I'm going to give Colossal Dreadmask a D, just because I think expensive artifacts are just not necessarily where you want to be in this format, just because it does suffer a lot of splash damage. If, let's say, the format's slow and you find that you will have the opportunity to move this equipment around, I could see the ceiling for this being maybe like a low C at best. But I'm going to start things off with a D here for Colossal Dreadmask. Moving on, we have Eladamri, Korvek Doll. 1 green for a 3/3 legendary elf warrior. This is a mythic rare. You may look at the top card of your library. You may cast creature spells from the top of your library. Green, tap, and tap 2 untapped creatures you control. Reveal a card from your hand or the top of your library. If you reveal a creature card this way, put it onto the battlefield. Activate only during your turn. So what that means is you need to pay a green, tap this, and tap 2 other creatures you control. So it requires 3 creatures total. But if you do, you get to cheat creatures into play from either your hand or on top of your library. So that's pretty nice. I mean, just a 3 mana 3/3 that gives you kind of additional information because you can always look at the top card of your library. And then whenever you have a creature, you get to play it for free. That's just value, right? I mean, it's a 3 mana 3/3. It's a little bit hard to cast. And one thing that I've learned, especially from the last set, we had Karavek, which looked like an awesome card, which ended up just being mediocre. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that it was 1 black. So you have to look at this as well as a 1 green card. But this card does guarantee you value. If you play a deck with you want to play a creature heavy deck, maybe 17, 16 creatures in your deck, and that means you're going to hit a creature about 40% of the time. And every now and then you're going to be able to cheat an Eldrazi into play, which is also really, really nice. So because of the value that you can get out of a 3 mana 3/3, Eladamri Corvectal gets a B for me. Next we have Eldrazi Repurposer. 2 and a green for a 3/3 Eldrazi drone. When you cast a spell, and when Eldrazi Repurposer dies, create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token with sacrifice this creature, add a colorless mana. This card is excellent. This is a high C. This might be the best green common in the set. 3 mana for a 3/3 that gives you a Scion when it enters a battlefield. That's already good enough, right? In green, you're already looking to kind of be the Eldrazi ramp aggro or Eldrazi ramp mid-range-ish deck. And this is exactly what you want. 3 mana for a 3/3. 3 mana for a 3/3 is already fine. But 3 mana for a 3/3 that gives you a Scion is good. And then the fact that this also gives you a Scion on the way out means this is a high C level card. I am a fan of Eldrazi Repurposer, and I do like it more than the Basking Brood scale, for example. Also, just imagine a curve where you go turn 3 Eldrazi Repurposer, turn 4 the 2 red and a green 2/3 that makes 2 0/1s. That thing gets a +1/+1 counter whenever you sacrifice any Scion. So I just think red and green just have a lot of tools that go really, really well together. I like Eldrazi Repurposer a lot. Moving on, we have Evolution Witness. 2 and a green. So another solid 3-drop here. 2/1, Elf Shaman Mutant. 1 and a green, adapt 2. Whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on Evolution Witness, return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. So this is a 3-drop where when you pay 2 mana to adapt, you get to return a permanent from your graveyard to your hand. So this isn't quite Eternal Witness. You can't get any spells back from your graveyard, so it's certainly not as good as that. And it is a much higher mana investment to get value out of this. Now, if this format is a little bit slower, then this card is still great, right? For 5 mana, you get a 4/3 that basically kind of a 4/3 Gravedigger, but it's a little bit better than Gravedigger. That's fine. And then you can also kind of piecemeal the mana by paying 3 and then 2 afterwards. So very, very solid card. And also, if you can find ways to toss counters onto this in addition to the adapt, then you can just find more ways to put permanents from your graveyard to your hand. So I do like the Evolution Witness. I'm going to give this a C as well. Moving on, we have Fanatic of Ronus. 1 and a green for a 1/4 Snake Druid. Tap, add a green. 2 mana, 1/4 mana creature. I'm in. Ferocious. Add green. Activate only if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. What? Eternalize. 2 green. 2 green. Exile this card from your graveyard. Create a token that's a copy of it, except it's a 4/4 black zombie snake druid with no mana cost. Eternalize only as a sorcery. Wow. This is a mana creature on steroids. It's a 2 mana 1/4 that taps to add a green, but if you have a big creature in play, right, a creature with power 4 or more, it taps for 4 mana. This is exactly what you want in these Eldrazi ramp decks, because if you can play a 4-power creature, that means, on turn 5 even, you can play a Kozilek, right? Just with this alone and another 4-power creature, this card is awesome. And then when this thing dies, it just comes back even bigger. yeah, I am all about this card. Now, remember, it's still a 2-mana 1/4, right? But the fact that it gives you potentially 4 mana and also eternalizes puts this kind of at the upper echelon of what you would expect out of a mana creature. So Fanatic of Rhonas for me gets a high B. Next, we have Fangs of Colonia. 1 and a green for a sorcery. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, then double the number of +1/+1 counters on each creature that had a +1/+1 counter put on it this way. Overload for green. You may cast a spell for its overload cost. If you do, change target in its text to each. So let me just go over kind of all the different ways you can utilize this card. You know what? I want to actually start with the overload. When you overload this, you're not going to be able to do too much else with your mana. It costs 6 mana. But the idea is when you overload this card, you pay 6 mana and you effectively get to put 2 +1/+1 counters on all your creatures. So that's a nice mana sink. In addition, you can pay 2 mana to put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature. Now, given the fact that this costs 2 mana, you can also use this in conjunction with other cards, right? Let's say you have an adapt card. Right? Let's say you played the Evolution Witness, right? You have a 3 mana 2/1, then you pay 2 mana to adapt it, turn it into a 4/3, then you play Fangs of Colonia on it, right? And that becomes a 5/4. Then it has 3 counters on you, and you double the number of counters on that, and then all of a sudden it has 6 counters on it. So Fangs of Colonia is pretty solid, and I think given the fact that it has an overload cost as well, that can potentially kill your opponent out of nowhere, I'm going to give this a C. I'm going to give this a C level card. I don't think it's too much better than that, but, you know, typically I might even give an effect like this a D, but I think with the overload, I will give Fangs of Colonia a C. If you have lots of +1/+1 counters, maybe this goes up to like a high C level type card. Moving on, we have Flare of Cultivation. 1 green, sorcery. You may sack a non-token green creature rather than pay this spell's mana cost. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, reveal those cards, put one onto the battlefield tapped and the other one into your hand. Then shuffle. You know, I'm a big fan of Kodama's Reach type cards or Cultivate. But the fact that this thing costs 1 green makes this significantly worse than Cultivate. Because with Cultivate, you can pretty easily cast that card on turn 3 with 9 green sources. With this, you can't always do that. And you don't necessarily want to be sacrificing a creature for this effect either. So I think given the fact that this is so difficult to cast 1 green means you're going to want something like 10 green sources to play this consistently on turn 3. I'm going to give Flare of Cultivation a D. If this was 2 colorless and a green, I think I would give it a C. But given that it's kind of tough to cast, I'm going to give this a D. I just think it's too hard to cast this card. Next, we have Foul Strike. Wow, look at the art on this one. It's kind of cartoonish, isn't it? 1 and a green for an instant. Destroy target creature with flying. Reinforce 2, 2 and a green. 2 and a green, discard, put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. So this is kind of a nice little flexible card, right? For 2 mana, you can kill a creature with flying, or for 3 mana, you can put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature, which works well with some of the other +1/+1 synergies that exist in the set. Does this put it up? Because both cards are D level cards. But if you combine the two, can I see this going up to a C level card? Depending on the number of flyers, I don't think it still quite gets there for me. I think they're just both kind of weak effects in general. 3 mana for 2 +1/+1 counters, or 2 mana to kill a flyer, both aren't especially good. So I think Foul Strike is a filler level card, maybe a D+ type card, but I'm going to just give it a D and see where this goes. Next, we have Gift of the Viper, green, instant. Put a +1/+1 counter, a reach counter, and a death touch counter on target creature and untap it. For my combat tricks, I want to give it hexproof or indestructible. This card gives neither. So I just don't, I know you can blow people out occasionally by untapping a bigger creature, but I don't know that that's enough. So, and it doesn't give lifelink either. So for Gift of the Viper, I'm going to give this a D level combat trick. You can play it as a filler card if you want, but I'm not too happy with a card like this. Next, we have Grist, Voracious Hydra. 1 mana for a 1/2 death touch creature. All right, that's playable. Whenever Grist Voracious Larva or another creature enters a battlefield under your control, if it entered from your graveyard or you cast it from your graveyard, you may pay green. If you do, exile Grist, then return it to the battlefield transformed under its owner's control. So the question really becomes, how often are you able to actually play a creature card from your graveyard without casting it? That's something that maybe I'll find out as we preview some of the other cards. But right now, I just am going to kind of assume that it's kind of difficult. And so I'm mostly going to be evaluating this as a 1-mana 1/2 Death Touch creature, which is in this format where everything is a little bit more powerful. I think that's a D level card, maybe a high D. If you have enough ways to kind of put creatures into play from the graveyard and you can activate this, then yes, there's obviously a lot more upside there. Then you get this up to maybe a high C, depending on what you get when you flip this card. So let's see. If you flip this card, you get Grist the Plague Swarm. 3 loyalty, legendary Planeswalker Grist. +1, create a 1/1 black and green insect creature token, then mill 2 cards. Put a death touch counter on the token if a black card was milled this way. So you have to mill a black card in order to get a death touch counter. -2, destroy target artifact or enchantment. -6, for each creature card in your graveyard, create a token that's a copy of it, except it's a 1/1 black and green insect token. These effects are fine, but not the most interesting. I was hoping you'd get something very similar to the actual card Grist, but you don't. You get a disenchant effect, and you get a 1/1 insect every turn. Every now and then you get a 1/1 death touch insect, but you're going to have a lot of black cards. So yeah, I'm pretty happy just giving this a D, and if you can find ways to put it into play, then I guess I'll go up to a C for this, but I think this is more of a constructed card than anything. Moving on, we have Horrific Assault. Green for a sorcery. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature or planeswalker you don't control. If you control an Eldrazi, you gain 3 life. I mean, this is very likely to be the best green common in the set. I mean, just look at it. It's a Rabid Bite for 1 mana, and if you have an Eldrazi, you gain 3 life. And a lot of the good green cards are Eldrazi. Green's looking to ramp. You're going to have Scions in play as well. So this is a 1 mana Rabid Bite that will gain 3 life in a lot of instances. I think this card is great. Going to give this a high C. Next, we have the Hunger Tide Rises. 2 and a green for a saga. It has 4 chapters. The first 3 chapters, you get to create a 1/1 black and green insect creature token. So over the course, the turn you play it, you get a 1/1. Then the next turn you get a 1/1. Then the turn after you get a 1/1. Then the turn after that, you can sacrifice any number of creatures. Search your library and or graveyard for a creature card with mana value less than or equal to the number of creatures sacrificed this way and put it onto the battlefield. If you search your library this way, shuffle. I just think this effect is a little too slow, honestly. 3 mana to make a 1/1, but you don't get 3 1/1s immediately. You get a 1/1, and then a 1/1, and then a 1/1. Is that good? I'm not that impressed with that. And then you get to sack any number of creatures, but again, that's assuming that you didn't trade off any of these insects before. And then let's say you trade it off, you sack all 3 of your insects. Then you get to search your library for a 3-drop. Like, that's fine, I guess, but you had to wait 3 turns to sack all these tokens to get a 3-drop, maybe a 4-drop. I'm just not convinced by the Hunger Tide Rises. And so I'm going to give this a D. I don't think it's good enough. Also, this card came a little bit earlier, but we'll just ignore that. I think it was supposed to come a little bit later, but moving on, we have Hydra Trainer. 1 and a green for a 1/1. Human Warrior. You may exert Hydra Trainer as it attacks. When you do, target creature gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of counters on permanents you control. 2 and a green, adapt 2. So 2 mana for a 1/1, not the most ideal body, but then for 3 mana, you get to adapt 2. So let's say turn 2 you play this, turn 3 you can adapt 2, and then you have a 3/3. When you attack, you can exert this, meaning you basically kind of put a stun counter on your creature. You exert and it doesn't untap during your next untap step. But if you do, again, here it says target creature gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of counters on permanents you control. So let's say you go turn 2 play this, turn 3 adapt, attack. if you want to, you can exert it and you can hit them for 5. So that's pretty nice. Now, this is obviously kind of the card that you want to play in a deck that's looking to put a lot of +1/+1 counters on things. I think the green-white deck is kind of where you're looking to put counters on things. There's a lot of adapt going on. There's also green-black. And so in those instances where you have lots of counters going around, this can potentially hit people for a lot, but you can only do it kind of once. So I feel like in a lot of instances, you're going to be attacking with a Hydra Trainer, likely going to be targeting the Hydra Trainer to keep it alive, and then kind of either force your opponent to chump block or what have you. But at the end of the day, it's still a pretty big mana investment to get this to be pretty good. So I don't think this card is absurd. I think if you are drafting the counters deck, it definitely goes up in value. But by itself, I'm going to give Hydra Trainer a C. If you have infinite counters all over the place, making this, an 8/8 every time you exert, sure. There's a lot of good ways to chump in this format too, though, with all the Scions running around. So for that reason, I still don't think it's absurd. Next, we have Lion Umbra. Green, enchantment aura, enchant modified creature. Equipment, auras its controller controls, and counters are modifications. So you can't target a creature unless it's already modified. Enchanted creature gets +3/+3 vigilance and reach. Umbra armor. If enchanted creature would be destroyed, instead remove all damage from it and destroy this aura. So this is the type of card that you want to be putting in your kind of green-white creature modification deck. But the fact that there's just such a big build around to this seems like a card that's more pointed towards constructed than anything. I just don't think this card gives you enough. You need to modify a creature, and then if you modify it again and your opponent, let's say, uses a removal spell in response, that's just a complete and utter blowout. So Lion Umbra is just not something I'm interested in taking highly. It's also kind of hard to cast. This is no Daybreak Coronet, let's put it that way. I'm going to give Lion Umbra a D. Moving on, we have Malevolent Rumble. 1 and a green for a sorcery. Reveal the top 4 cards of your library. You may put a permanent card from among them into your hand, put the rest into your graveyard, create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token with sacrifice this creature, add colorless mana. So, in most green-based decks, you're almost never going to miss with this, right? You don't want to play this in a spell-heavy deck, but you're almost always going to hit a land or some kind of a permanent, and this gives you an Eldrazi spawn, right? So it kind of helps you ramp if you need, makes a thing. There's several things in this format that want to kind of recur things from your graveyard, and this seems like an excellent enabler for that, because you're not down a card. You play this, you get a card back, and you get that Scion that you can do whatever you want with. So I do think this is a solid card. I'm going to give Malevolent Rumble a C. Next, we have Monstrous Vortex. 3 and a green for an enchantment. Whenever you cast a creature spell with power 5 or greater, wow, discover X, where X is that spell's mana value. Well, we all know where this goes into, right? I mean, if you're just playing kind of a low-to-the-ground deck, this card is completely unplayable and an F, right? Power 5 or greater is a very, very steep cost. I mean, most of the time, effects like this require you to have a creature with power 4 or greater. So 5 or greater is really, really rough. I mean, you're going to want to play like Eldrazi. So at what point do you get value out of this? Well, I feel like you're going to need to play 2 creatures with power 5 or greater to get value, because you're spending an entire turn to play this card. So in kind of the Eldrazi ramp decks, where you have a lot of top-end cards, sure, I think this could be okay. If you play 2, it's good. If you play 3, it's very good. But how often are you going to be able to do that? I'm not convinced. And so I think, and then there's also going to be times where you just top deck this after you've played your big thing. So I'm going to give Monstrous Vortex an F if you have nothing, and a C in the Eldrazi decks that can potentially use this card. Next, we have Nightshade Dryad. 1 and a green for a 1/2 Dryad. It's got Death Touch, tap to add a colorless mana, or tap to add mana of any color. So this is pretty nice. There is going to be no shortage of expensive things you want to do if you're going to be a base green deck, because oftentimes you're going to be looking to ramp into Eldrazi cards, right? And this is nice because it is a mana ramp creature that gives you the colorless that you need to play some of those colorless casted cards, while also having Death Touch, meaning it's never dead in the late game either, right? You have the Bite spell. You can use combine that with this to kill something big that you need, or you can trade this with something big that your opponents have. So I do think Nightshade Dryad is very, very solid as a mana ramp creature, and I'm going to give this a C. Moving on, we have Nyxborn Hydra. Green X for a 0/1. Enchantment creature Hydra. Bestow X green green. It's got reach and trample. Nyxborn Hydra enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for each +1/+1 counter on Nyxborn Hydra, and it has reach and trample. Wow. When you look at this card, like 15 years ago, this card would be like a rare. But now it is a common just because creatures have gotten that much better. I'm not saying that this card is awesome. I'm just, X green type cards. Think about Ivy Elemental, right? I think that was a rare. But anyways, I mean, this card's solid, right? You're never getting a ton of value for mana, but like, for example, let's say you play this for 5 mana. For 5 mana, you get a 4/5 Reach Trampler. That's okay. Not insane. But the thing is, this card has flexibility, and you have to factor that in. You get a 4 mana 3/4 Reach Trample. That's fine. And then if you have a ton of mana, you get a lot of value there as well. On top of that, there's the Bestow, where you can put this on one of your other cards to have that card be huge. And then when that creature dies, you're still left with the Hydra left over. And green also has a ton of ways to accelerate. I mean, look at the previous card, right? These go really, really well together. So I think Nyxborn Hydra is a C. Happy to have this in basically most of my green decks. I don't think it's absurd, but I do like the card. It's just a really, really great mana sink with all the mana ramp that the green decks provide. Next, we have Path of Annihilation. 3 and a green for an enchantment. It's a devoid enchantment. This card has no color. When Path of Annihilation enters a battlefield, create 2 0/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion tokens with sacrifice this, add a colorless mana. Eldrazi you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color, and whenever you cast a creature spell with mana value 7 or greater, you gain 4 life. Okay, so this is precisely the type of card that you want in your Eldrazi ramp decks, right? All Eldrazi in your deck have the ability to give you mana acceleration. This works really, really well with a lot of the other devoid green cards that you have access to, right? And so this really just honestly turbocharges your mana acceleration. Now, again, this card by itself is completely fine, right? 4 mana, you basically get 2 mana creatures. But not only that, on turn 5, if you play land drop number 5, you actually have access to 9 mana. Right? You play land number 5, you tap your 2 Scions for whatever color you need, then you can still sacrifice them because it's not tap sacrifice, meaning you can play your Ulamog, you can play your Kozilek, right? Very, very early. So this is exactly the ramp effect that you want, not to mention the green 2 mana common Eldrazi creature, the green 3 mana common Eldrazi creature that makes a 0/1. Right? You can have access to so much mana from this. And it also helps you when you're behind, right? Because when you play this, you're not really adding a lot of combat stats to the battlefield, but you play this, if you survive, the next turn you play something big and then you gain 4 life. And then you play another big thing, then it's awesome. So I actually had this initially rated as a C, but I've hyped myself up and talked this up into, I think this is a premier ramp type card. Now you need to have payoff cards here, but this is a very, very good payoff card. I'm going to give Path of Annihilation a B, a low B maybe, but I think this is excellent in the Eldrazi ramp decks. Moving on, we have Priest of Titania, 1 and a green for a 1/1 elf druid. Tap, add a green for each elf on the battlefield. I did a quick pass on elves in the format. This is meant for modern and modern only. This is just a 2 mana 1/1 that taps to add a green. There's a lot better options if you want mana acceleration in the format. It's still a 2 mana creature, but I'm not super high on it. I'll give this a high D, I guess. But nothing too special here. If you really need mana acceleration, sure, you can play it, but I'd much rather, there's a lot of other mana acceleration options that I would rather play over something like Priest of Titania, simply because there are just basically no other elves in this format. Moving on, we have Primal Prayers, 2 green for an enchantment. When Primal Prayer enters the battlefield, you get 2 energy. You may cast creature spells with mana values 3 or less by paying energy rather than paying their mana cost. If you cast a spell this way, you may cast it as though it had flash. I mean, so you get to turn your energy into mana effectively, and then you can ambush people, but you can only ambush them with small things? So again, this is a card that gives you 2 energy, but no value otherwise. It just kind of allows you to play your cheap things, which you can already do in just normal limited Magic. So not a big fan of Primal Prayers. I'm going to give this a D. Next, we have a Propagator Drone. 1 and a green for a 2/2 Eldrazi drone. It's devoid. Creature tokens you control have evolved. They have. Whenever a creature enters a battlefield under your control, if it has greater power or toughness than this token, put a +1/+1 counter on this token. 3 and a green. Create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token with sack this creature, add a colorless. So we're looking at a 2 mana 2/2, and it is basically a card that goes really, really well with a deck that's able to create a lot of different Eldrazi Scions, Eldrazi spawn tokens, right? This can already generate this, the Scions by itself, but if you have other cards that generate the Scions, then the spawns rather, and then you just start playing big creatures on top of that, those spawns then continue to grow. So if you have a deck that's able to make a bunch of spawns, then you can have them kind of start to grow over time, which is nice. But at the end of the day, I mean, this is kind of a 2 mana 2/2, 4 mana to make a 0/1 is not that strong. Now, they do have Evolve, which is okay, but I don't know that this gives you enough to get this kind of over to the B level. I will give this kind of a C, a high C. If your deck's just making infinite spawns, then maybe this gets up to a B level card, but you need to be able to make a lot of them. This by itself, I just don't think it's good enough. 4 mana to make a 0/1 that then can sometimes turn into a 1/2 and then 2. It's a lot of mana. It's a lot of mana. Next, we have Signature Slam. 2 and a green, instant. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Then, each modified creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. I mean, remember how good Clear Shot was in the previous set? This is kind of that, but has upside for more, and it puts a counter on the creature instead of just giving a +1/+1 until end of turn. Excellent, excellent combat trick. It's a bite effect as well. It's kind of like a murder, right? Especially if you have other modified creatures, you're just almost guaranteed to kill something while also putting a +1/+1 counter on a thing, which goes with some of the synergies that you're going to see later with +1/+1 counters. Signature Slam is an excellent, excellent removal spell. Give this a B. Next, we have 6. 6 by itself, branching off and doing its own thing from Ren. 2 and a green for a 2/4 legendary tree folk with reach. Whenever 6 attacks, mill 3 cards. You may put a land card from among them into your hand. That's already very solid. As long as it's your turn, non-land permanent cards in your graveyard have retrace. You may cast permanent cards from your graveyard by discarding a land card in addition to paying their other costs. So this kind of works well all by itself. It's self-contained. It's a 3 mana 2/4, and then when you attack with it, you mill yourself, right? And when you do, you get to put a land. If you hit a land, you can put a land in your hand, and then you get to mill things, and then you get to cast those cards by discarding a land from your hand. I think this card just gives you really, really solid value for what's already just kind of pretty solid stats by itself. 3 mana for a 2/4 reach that gives you a value effect when you attack. If you play this turn 3, oftentimes they're not going to be able to block to kill it, and then you get your value there, and then you have that kind of other line of text that just gives you value in the late game. I'm going to give 6 a B. Very solid. Next, we have Sowing Micah Spawn. 3 and a green for a 3/3 Eldrazi Fungus with the Devoid. This is with Kicker, 1 and a colorless mana. So you have to use a colorless mana to be able to kick this. Not just forest, something needs to make colorless mana. When you cast this spell, search your library for a land card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. So in normal limited, you just get any land here. You just get a basic in a lot of instances. When you cast a spell, if it was kicked, exile target land. So we're looking at a 4-mana 3/3. It enters the battlefield, gets you a land. It's pretty solid, right? And then kicker, it kills a land. I don't know how good that is, right? Because by the time it's turn 6, when you kill a land, like, are you even getting that much value out of it? So I'm mostly evaluating this as kind of a 4-mana 3/3 enters a battlefield, gets you a land. How good is that card? It's good. It's very solid. Never cutting it. I would give Sowing Mycospawn a high C. Next, we have Springheart Nantuko. 1 and a green for a 1/1 enchantment creature, Insect Monk. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1. It's got Bestow, 1 and a green. Landfall. Whenever land enters a battlefield under your control, you may pay 1 and a green if Springheart Nantuko is attached to your creature you control. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that creature. If you didn't create a token this way, create a 1/1 green insect creature token. Okay, so let's break it down here. Let's just look at the creature by itself. So let's say the creature by itself is a 2-mana 1/1, landfall. You get a 1/1 insect, right? Alternatively, you can bestow this onto a bigger creature, and that's where you get a ton of value. Because let's say you bestow, whatever, a 4/4, right? You pay 2 mana. So let's say turn 4, you play a 4/4. Turn 5, you bestow this, okay? Then you play a land. You can pay 1 and a green because Springheart Nantuko is now bestowed upon this creature. And if you do, you create a token of the thing that you've bestowed, which is excellent, right? And if they kill the creature, you still have a Springheart Nantuko in play with landfall, make a 1/1 every turn. That seems really, really solid to me. So, you know what? Upon further reflection and after reading this, I'm going to upgrade this from what I had previously going into this. I had it as a B, but I actually think this might be like a low A because it's so cheap, right? The fact that you can copy something every single turn, if they don't kill your creature, that's really, really solid. I mean, even if you did it turn 3, like let's say you go turn 3, play a 3/3, right? The 2 and a green make a 3/3, that 3/3 that makes a 0/1. Turn 4, you bestow this for 2 mana, you play a land, you pay another 2 mana, and then you just keep making copies of this unless it dies. And then after it dies, you still have landfall, make a 1/1 every turn. That is just a lot of value for something that's so cheap to go off with. So yeah, I am a believer in the Springheart Nantuko. Next, we have Sylvan Safekeeper. Green for a 1/1, sack a land. The target creature you control gains Shroud until end of turn. F. I do not want to play 1-mana 1/1s that make me sacrifice lands. No thank you. Next, we have Temperamental Oozewag. 3 and a green for a 4/4. There you go, 4-mana 4/4. 2 and a green, adapt 2. It's an Ooze Brushwag, so very vanilla-ish. Modified creatures you control have trample. So that's pretty nice. I mean, we're looking at a 4-mana 4/4 with adapt 2. So 4-mana 4/4 that becomes a 6/6 trampler. So another Colossal Dreadmaw variant. I think just a 4-mana 4/4 likely would have been a D-level card in this format, but I think this has enough going for it where I will give it a C. It's not the most impressive thing, right? In order to get a 6/6 trampler, you have to spend 7 mana, but 4-mana 4/4 is fine, and then the trample effect will happen. The adapt is okay, so it's a fine creature to play in your green decks. I'll give it a C. Next, we have Territory Color. 4 and a green for a 7/5 Eldrazi with Devoid. Reach. So 5 mana for a 7/5 Reach. Yes, sign me up. Landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, look at the top card of your library. If it's a creature card, you may reveal it and put it into your hand. If you don't put the card into your hand, you may put it into your library. So this card's obviously better if you have lots of creatures in your deck, but the fact that this is a 5 mana 7/5 Reach creature with the upside of just drawing a card 40-ish% of the time whenever you play a land, that is very, very solid. I'm going to give Territory Color a B. Also, at that point in the game, you know, let's say you played this turn 5, turn 6 you play a land. At that point, you don't really want any lands, right? You have the decision. You get to basically scry. Basically, it's landfall. If it's a creature, you draw a card. And if it's not, it's scry, right? Because you have the decision. It's not auto mill. You may put it into your graveyard. So this is a 5-mana 7/5 with reach. Landfall, either draw a creature spell or scry 1. That's amazing. That's great. Sign me up. Next, we have Thief of Existence. One, and then 1 colorless mana and green. So 3 mana total. You need a colorless mana to cast this. 3/4 for a devoid Eldrazi creature. Whenever you cast this spell, exile up to 1 target non-creature, non-land permanent an opponent controls with mana value 4 or less. If you do, Thief of Existence gains. When this creature leaves the battlefield, the target opponent draws a card. So, no matter what, you will be able to kill the thing that you want, right? No matter what you do, you'll be able to kill the thing that you want, and they won't get it back. But if you do exile something with this, your opponent draws a card. Now, remember, this will not kill a creature, but think about it this way. Now, the colorless is a big cost. I don't know how often you're going to be able to play this on turn 3. Probably not that often. That's kind of the main thing against it. But if you do, I mean, it's a fine body. But every now and then, I mean, if you can just eat an artifact, that's awesome, right? The fact that you can have a 3-mana 3/4 with the upside of being able to eat an artifact is really, really solid. Is really, really solid. So I do like the Thief of Existence. I think there's just going to be enough targets to get with this that I'm going to give this a B. And the thing is, you can just play it without having a target either, and a 3-mana 3/4 is just something that's totally fine in your deck. Next, we have Trickster's Elk. 2 and a green for a 3/3. Enchantment creature Elk with Bestow, 1 and a green. If you cast this card for its Bestow cost, it's an aura spell with Enchant creature. There's lots of Bestow cards in this format, and basically you can just enchant either your creature or your opponent's creature, actually. And enchanted creature loses all abilities and is a green elk creature with base power and toughness 3/3. So you get to Oko something, right? You get to turn something into a 3/3, or it's a 3-mana 3/3. I mean, if you ever target your opponent's creature with this, it's not particularly good. Like, they need to have something gigantic in play for this to be good. And how often are you doing this on your creature and it's really good? It's going to have to be like a creature that comes into play with a bunch of +1/+1 counters, like the green-white 3/3 Vigilance Dog. That's where this would be good, because in that instance, it comes into play as a 6/6. I just don't know that this is impressive enough. I think there's a world where this can be okay, but I don't know. Something about this, just the cost of this, the creature isn't big enough. I don't like this card very much. I'm going to give Trickster's Elk a D. I'm just not that interested in a card like this. When you target your own creature, how much bigger are you making it, right? I guess if you can target your Scion, it's okay, like a Eldrazi spawn. And then if you target your opponent's thing, it has to be something big as well. But I mean, this doesn't cycle or anything. Yeah, I'm not in on this card. D for Trickster's Elk. Next, we have Warped Tusker, 7 colorless for a 6/8 Eldrazi Boar Beast with reach. You know, just a random large creature. Whenever you cast or cycle Warped Tusker, create a 0/1 Eldrazi spawn creature token with sack this creature, add a colorless, and then it's got cycle, 2 and a green. I mean, the fact that this has cycling is nice, right? Turn 3, you can cycle this, get a 0/1, draw a card, and then if you need something at the top end of your curve to play, well, this also doubles down as something that you can do in the late game. So I think given that flexibility, and especially if you're looking to be the green ramp deck, this can just be something large that you play in the end game. I'll give Warped Tusker kind of like a low C that you can play. Never taking this really all that highly. Honestly, it could be a D, but I'm trying to give the benefit of the doubt for these Eldrazi ramp decks, and for that reason, in that deck specifically, I will give this a low C. Next, we have Wirewood Symbiote, green for a 1/1 insect token. Return an elf you control to its owner's hand, untap target creature, activate only once each turn. Like I said before, there's basically no elves in this format. There's a Priest of Titania. There's a handful of others, but I just don't think that there's enough for this to be good. It does make it so that your elf can block a creature indefinitely, I guess. Or if there are elves that come into play and do something, that's good. But I'm almost never playing this, so I'm just going to give Symbiote a D. If you have like 4 elves in your deck, maybe this is somewhat playable. But I doubt it. It might be an F, to be honest. But honestly, whatever. D or F, not much of a difference there, right? Next, we have the Haumph Aberration. 3 and a green for a 6/6 Devoid Eldrazi Beast. There has to be a drawback, right? When you cast a spell, if colorless mana was not spent to cast it, target opponent may put a creature card from their hand onto the battlefield. And it's got Trample. So it's a 4 mana 6/6 Trampler. That is humongous. Now, like I said before, in general, creatures on rate alone are things I don't put a high value on, but this is enough value. 4 mana for a 6/6 Trample is absolutely gigantic. Now, remember, you want to be able to play this for the colorless cost, right? You don't want to just be jamming this in your deck that's not looking to make Scions or make colorless mana, because in a format where your opponents could also be playing Eldrazi, do you really want to play this without paying the colorless cost? So I just assume that Haumph Aberration is 2 generic mana, a colorless, and a green for a 6/6 Trampler. If you can do that on a relatively consistent basis, Haumph Aberration gets a B from me. And that'll do it for all the cards. So now let us go over what I feel are going to be the top 5 commons in green. All right, coming in at number 5, we have Evolution Witness. 2 and a green for a 2/1, 1 and a green, adapt 2. I mean, I talked about this card before, but this card is just something that gives you a lot of value. And honestly, I wouldn't be shocked if this goes up more, depending on how easy it is to kind of fill up your graveyard and how much value that you can get out of this card. I do like this card a lot. It is a lot of mana though, right? It is 5 mana to get some value, but if this format is slow enough, I can certainly see this going up in the rankings. Coming in at number 4, we have Basking Broodscale. 1 and a green for a 2/2 with Adapt. I just feel like this is just a really, really solid 2 mana card for these kind of devoid ramp strategies. So the fact that this is a 2 mana 2/2, it's got Adapt, so it allows you to make that Scion when you want. And then if you can find ways to put more counters on this, you just also generate more Scions, which goes well with, you know, for example, in green-white, if you can additionally put counters on this, that also goes a long way. So I think this is just a nice card. You're almost probably never cutting a card like this in your deck just because it's a very, very solid 2 mana creature that you can even go well in an aggressively slanted deck. Coming in at number 3, we have Nightshade Dryad. I just think this card kind of does everything that you want. Now, obviously a little bit better in the ramp decks. I think that's mostly what the green decks are trying to do, but if you're looking to be a little more aggressive, this card isn't quite as good. But in the ramp strategy, it gives you mana, and also the fact that it has Death Touch goes a long, long way. The thing is, a lot of the time you play 1 mana, 1/1, 2 mana, 1/1 Death Touch creatures anyways, right? So that's already a card that you play, and you also play 2 mana ramp creatures. This is just both. This is just both, so I really like the Nightshade Dryad. Coming in at number 2, Horrific Assault. I did say that I think this was going to be the number 1 common, and it could very well be. This is an excellent, efficient removal spell. You gain 3 life, you get to bite, you get to double spell. It's very, very nice. I am a big fan of the Horrific Assault, but I'm also a big fan of creatures that just give you a lot of value, and the card that I think comes in at number 1 that gives me a lot of value is Eldrazi Repurposer. 2 and a green for the 3/3 devoid creature, enters the battlefield and creates an Eldrazi spawn, leaves the battlefield and creates an Eldrazi spawn. I just think that's just way, way too much value to give up. This just goes well in any deck, right? If you're green-white or green-red, if you're green-red ramp or green-white and looking to be a little aggressive, this card is good in both decks. This can ramp you. And there's just a lot of synergies that go with this card. If you kill it, you still get another Scion. I just think this card is just going to be amazing. As we've known in the past, any creature that comes into play and creates anything like another permanent is always going to be good. It's almost always going to be good. And I don't think this is an exception. 3 mana for a 3/3 that gets you a Scion when it comes into play, it didn't need to make a sign when it left the battlefield, but it does. And for that reason, I'm going to say Eldrazi Repurposer is going to be the best green common in Modern Horizons 3. All right. Well, that does it here for the green cards for Modern Horizons 3. But of course, we have 4 more colors to cover. Next, we're going to go, so we went WUBRG and now we're going backwards. So the next video tomorrow, we will be going over the red cards. And I'm really excited about it because there's a lot of sweet red cards for us to discuss. The commons look pretty excellent. Lots of great removal to see coming up. So before I sign off though, I do want to say thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Feel free to hit the like or subscribe button for more daily videos just like this. If you've enjoyed this content and wanted to support the channel in another way, I do have a Patreon channel. The link to the Patreon is in the description below. Additionally, the link to my card rankings for green will also be in the description below. Everything is, I kind of set it up in alphabetical order. My main reason for doing this alphabetically is if you're drafting and you're like, hey, I want to find a card, it's way easier to scroll through the sheet in alphabetical order to see kind of what my card rankings are for all of the green cards. When I'm done with all the set reviews, I will have a master sheet that has all my card rankings and all the colors in one spreadsheet entirely. So stay tuned for that when I finish all of these set reviews. Once again, thank you all for watching. This was Modern Horizons 3 green set preview. Preview. We have a red coming up tomorrow. I'll catch you then.